Whom should you ask for a letter of recommendation? Someone who is well known, like a professor, or somebody who knows you well?
So the letter of recommendation is kind of like it exists on like two axes, and you want to maximize both. So there's like the fame of the person writing the letter, like how well known is that person, especially to the place that you're applying. And then there is like, let's say fame and reputation. Even if the person isn't known, you're like, okay, well, they're a professor, they're a tenured professor or whatever at UCSD. They must have done pretty well or something in research. The other axis is how well they know you, and and maybe a third axis is how long do you think their letter can be, because the how well, there's no rule that says a postdoc or a grad student can't write you a letter of recommendation, but they're not going to be scoring very high on the reputation axis because people don't really know them that well. But they could make up for it in the fact that they know you really well. They worked with you every day for 1 or 2 years or 4 years, and that can make for a really good letter. In that case, it might actually be useful to get the letter from the postdoc and a letter from the PI, and the letter from the PI might be shorter, but at least it's like the stamp of approval kind of thing. You want to go to places where people are healthy, where they appear to have good social interactions with each other. The surest way out of frustration and even depression is to be working toward a common goal with people that you enjoy working with. And another way to negotiate the rough patches, to deal with the rough patches, is to recognize that there are an infinite number of topics that a scientist or engineer could be working on. And often we don't realize that we have the power to change our situation, where if this particular approach isn't working, we think that if we give up after working on it for a month, that we are flushing all of that work, we're throwing it all away. And that's, some of you might have heard of the sunk cost fallacy, that if you throw good time after bad time, that you can recoup some of those losses. But usually it's best just to move on and to talk to your mentor or your supervisor, or even what maybe you came up with the idea and you're like, nope, I'm gonna trash this approach. I'm gonna find another approach to do. And sometimes, like, I realize that's like a form of contingent happiness. Like, we need to change our external circumstances to make us feel better about what we're doing. But honestly, like, I've had like kind of a meditation practice off and on for 6 years, and to try to get like an interior form of equanimity. But 50% of happiness is contingent, so you might as well embrace the contingency and use it to your advantage and just try to change your situation if at all possible.
How can you spot bad work environments? What are the red flags?
I would ask people who have been in the group. If there are people who left the group or left the company, I would ask them like what their experiences were like. If there are people in the group who complain about it, that is a huge red flag, because people who are in an organization have every reason in the world to view it through rose-colored glasses. One, because they want to justify their own life choices, and maybe convince you that what they did is the right thing, and that you should go along with what they say. So if you're interviewing for a position and there are people who are really negative about the organization, I would stay away from it.
How do you identify a positive fit?
Determining a positive fit like, you have a bunch of options and they all look good. It looks like the students or the researchers or the workers there are flourishing personally and professionally. Then differentiating one from another is a lot more difficult. It's easy to just like to dismiss the one with the red flags. To some extent, you have to go with a combination of like your gut and also looking at where the people have ended up that are doing work in those places. Also, I would go to a place where the PI especially seems to actually want you to be there, like the ones where they're really enthusiastic about recruiting you. Because if they don't respond to your email, or maybe it's just the grad student who kind of brought you on board but the PI doesn't ever really want to meet with you, then if it's like, if they're going to put that level of effort into recruiting your efforts and your time, like, then how much do you think they're going to help you after you're gone? Because I still need my PhD mentor and postdoc mentor, even though it's been 9 years since I was a postdoc and 11 years since I was a grad student and 16 years since I was an undergraduate, and I still need those people to like support me in my career. Like, I need letters sometimes, less so for my undergrad advisor, but I actually reach out to my postdoc mentor a few times a year to ask her for advice or for a letter of recommendation or something. And she was always somebody that was super supportive while I was in her group and has continued to remain so afterwards. So those are the types of characteristics of a lab that can really like accelerate your scholarship or career.
When and how do you know if you should drop a bad project?
When do you know when to cut your losses? That is the absolute hardest thing to know. There are grad students that are in the lab now, who have been in the lab in the past, who have been, and undergrads and postdocs who've been in my lab, and oftentimes there is a project that is just like, it's like cursed. and you don't know how long you should bark up that tree. And there's no easy answer. This is something that comes with experience, and what I can say is that the earlier that you can jettison a poorly performing project, the better. Sometimes it's useful to set a time limit. So, for example, I had a discussion with one of my grad students, and they'd been working on this project for a year and a half or something, and we were getting very close to publication. And there's an adage in scientific research that, well, you can always do one more experiment. Like, even when a paper's published, you can always do one more experiment. You could always do 10 more experiments. And when do you know when to stop? And so I told him, and I said it in like a 1960s sci-fi way. I said, I'll give you 4 of your Earth days, and then at the end of the 4 days, we're going to publish whatever we have. And sometimes it just comes down to setting a time limit. Say I'm gonna, but somebody has to hold you to it. So you have to tell somebody, right? Because social pressure is really useful. It's really like bad. It's what makes us stressed out, but it's also really useful if you can leverage it. So it's like if I'm not done with this if this project doesn't move in a month, and this is the date, and put it on a calendar and put it on a friend's calendar, then that's it, and we're moving on. So sometimes you just have to be kind of draconian with your own schedule. Sometimes I don't know. I imagine it's a little bit like holding on to a bad stock in the stock market. Like, you know, you could hold it forever and it might consume all of the money that you invested in it. And the question is, how long do you continue to hold on to the stock, or how long do you continue to stay at the roulette wheel or something? Not that I've ever played roulette at a casino, but it's sort of like that. So, rambling answer. I wish there was a better one. Set time limits. Use social pressure to your advantage, and jettison these projects early rather than later.
When applying to grad school, should I stay in the same field or try something different?
So, okay, I've been playing the piano since I was 6 years old, and I'm not very good for somebody who's been playing for 32 years. So, the reason I'm not very good is because I only play what I sound good playing. And if I had tried to learn something new, I'd probably have 5 times the repertoire than I do, and I would have a lot more musical experience. Same thing in research, where people do one thing in high school or undergrad research, and then they are convinced that that's what they want to do the next step in their education. So for me, that was organic synthesis of these bioactive natural product molecules. And when I went to grad school, I was like, I knew I could do it. So it was like seemed low risk to me, but it also seemed a little bit boring to continue doing the same thing. So I totally switched to a completely different topic. I would encourage, so especially because that first topic that you have, you came to it often because of luck. Like that was the person who responded to the email. So like you send 10 emails out and you get one response, and you end up doing that. So you do like, I don't know, soft robotics or history of the Enlightenment or something. And then when you're in a position to decide what to do next, you choose the exact same thing because you're good at it. Whereas if you chose something different, you could learn some totally new thing, and that might become your new most fluent language. So I would encourage people to switch topics more often than they are usually inclined to do because of, human inertia. And oftentimes when I see candidates who apply for grad school and they're like, no, I can only do this one thing, or this is, and why is it just that one thing? It's because that's the professor who responded to their email when they were a sophomore.
How can you figure out what a lab is working on when you don't yet speak the language?
Yeah, it's really hard at the beginning to have a good idea of, one, what your own interests are, and two, whose interests among the faculty actually align with those, and actually what they're doing. Like learning what they're actually doing can be quite difficult. Sometimes their lab websites look like they're from 1995. And that's quite typical in academia, is to not update your website. So what's on there, that's actually a red flag if that's the case. But sometimes what's on those websites could be so out of date that it's not even what they're doing. Also, the big picture of what a lab is working on, whether it's like cancer biology or mechanics of biomaterials or organic synthetic chemistry. Sometimes it's not even that clear from the website. So I think this is where it's important to try to match your interests with popular versions of how that lab communicates with the outside world. And that could be YouTube, it could be podcasts. a lot of my colleagues have been guests on podcasts, and actually I find out what some of my colleagues are doing by listening to like what they say, and because they're saying it to like they're describing it to a non-specialist audience, it's like easy for me to understand what they're doing. So like I developed a collaboration. I now have a grant with a member of the Department of Anesthesiology based on using a wearable haptic device to assist meditation to help chronic pain patients. And that came like directly from my listening to their appearance on a science podcast. So if you can find like the most high level, and by high level I mean like 30,000 foot view level description of what those labs are doing and say, that's what I'm interested in, I really like what they said, I'm going to apply to that lab.
How much agency do undergrads typically have in choosing a project within a research group?
On one side, you have glassware washing, where nobody wants to do, if you're in a lab where they're just having you wash glassware, quit immediately. Then the other extreme is like maybe after some experience, you have your own project, and that could lead to like a first author paper. So a first author paper as an undergrad is like the unicorn thing. It's like a very rare thing, but when you see it, it's pretty impressive, because it takes a lot of like luck to be in a position where you can like lead your own project, and usually that doesn't happen until you've been in the lab for a couple of years. Sometimes, so the projects available depend on the sort of underlying scientific expertise of the lab. It depends on the specific projects that the grad students are doing at the time that you join the lab, and projects also depend on, like, a good project also fits into the strategy of the group. So ideally, when a professor gets good at their job, they can match projects with funding opportunities, publication opportunities, and funding opportunities that will perpetuate that research in the future. There are a lot of things that could be done in the lab. There are a lot of things that would lead to a paper, but they are not things that could lead to sustainable funding. So I would say that that when an undergrad comes into a lab and they have their own ideas, if the idea is not a good idea, it is usually for one of two reasons. One is that it doesn't fit in with the long-term funding strategy of the group, which is difficult to know without experience. The second is that the idea has already been done, and because the undergrad doesn't have the experience to like know what has or hasn't been done. But that's just if they come in with their own idea. If the undergrad works with a grad student or a postdoc, or even with the PI, depending on the level of involvement of the PI in the actual research, eventually there may be an idea that comes out of that work that can be spun off into an undergraduate's primary project. And that's happened multiple times in my group. So I think there are 4 papers that have undergrad first authors, where undergrads were the first author. It might be 5 now, or one time it was actually two papers written by the same student. So it definitely does happen. It wasn't necessarily an idea they came up with before joining the group, or even within the first 2 quarters of being in the group, but it was something that arose from their experience and the results of doing that project.
Suppose you have a good idea of what you want to work on as an undergraduate or graduate student. How do you find the labs doing the work you want to
Yeah,
do?
so I would start I would treat that like a research project. I would start a document. I'd start like a word processor document and write down the like categorize like cancer biology. I don't know why I'm using that example, but let's go with it. Cancer biology, um, uh, virology and immunology, um, neuroscience, and just take each lab that you like first just put in the Google terms and use like neuroscience, UCSD, neuroscience, the Scripps Research Institute, neuroscience, Salk, neuroscience, Sanford Burnham, and then comb through and find the lab names and cut and paste those into the document. And that's sort of like level one, scratching the surface. Level two might be searching for popular things that they've done. And I really think that this is where YouTube and podcasts like are helpful, because if you search, and even Twitter actually, a lot of labs have a Twitter page. A lot of PIs have a Twitter page. Some of you may not realize this, but if you want to get in the heads of the inner lives of your faculty members, of the people teaching your classes, then look up their Twitter feed and you can see all of their inner thoughts that they have broadcast to the entire world. And that can be fairly entertaining. But they also post their research news on Twitter, so you can follow them there. And then that's sort of level two. Level three is the peer-reviewed literature. And the peer-reviewed literature has lots of different kinds of paper. We talked about this in the video. But if you can find the levels like review, accounts, mini review, papers that they've written for publications like Scientific American or something like that, and you can read those papers, then you can get a closer sense of like what they're actually doing in the lab. Like what are they like mixing together? Because that's what scientists do, is they mix graduated cylinders together like this. And I think the final step is to compose an email and reach out and say, this is why I'm applying to your group. And it's not because, I want to line on my resume. It's because I'm really interested. You don't say that, of course, but this is, why I'm interested in your research and what I think I could offer, and just show enthusiasm and see what they say. If the goal is to like get a Zoom conversation with them, or with their grad students, or maybe to get invited to a group meeting, that's something that you can put in the email. Like maybe not the first email, maybe after they respond once, you could ask that. And the surest way to get somebody to do something is to make them want to do it. Actually, the only way, the only way to get somebody to do something is to make them want to do it. And if that's to be invited to a group meeting, they have to know why you're interested and what you might be able to offer, but much less the second thing. Offering enthusiasm is more than enough at this point, especially if it's your first research experience. It could be fun too. Like, I think you'll learn a lot in the process of discovery. It's actually a lot like the process of, like when I was applying for grad schools and faculty positions. I think I met with, 10 people at each place that I applied to when I did my visits or interviews. And you just learn so much, and then at the end you think that your goals are going to be way different than, or your goals are often way different than they were when you first set out upon the task.